There comes a moment in certain relationships when the noise stops, not because the conflict is resolved, but because something inside you grows quiet. The explaining ends, the hoping softens. The need to be understood by the person who keeps misunderstanding you finally releases its grip. This moment does not arrive with certainty or celebration. It arrives with fatigue, with clarity, with a strange calm you did not know you were allowed to feel. You realize you are no longer trying to win love, earn safety, or prove your worth. You are simply present with yourself. And that is when everything changes. Because for someone who depends on your attention, your care, your emotional labor, your withdrawal is not neutral, it is seismic. It is not your anger that unsettles them or your boundaries that alarm them, it is your indifference. When a narcissist realizes you do not care anymore, they do not experience this as loss in the way most people would. They experience it as collapse. And what follows is not about love returning, but about control scrambling. This is a story about that moment, the moment you stop performing, the moment you stop centering them, the moment your attention comes home to you. And what unfolds next reveals a truth that was always there waiting for you to see. The narcissist's power is rooted in attention control, not love, because their sense of self is externally constructed rather than internally grounded. They do not experience connection as mutual exchange, but as regulation, where your focus stabilizes their fragile identity. Attention functions like oxygen. It reassures them that they exist, that they matter, that they are superior or central. Without it, they feel hollow, disoriented, and exposed. This is why love, in the true sense, intimacy, empathy, reciprocity, is not the organizing force in the relationship. Control over your emotional attention is, from the beginning, attention is carefully engineered. They charm not to know you, but to secure your gaze. They mirror your desires, not to bond, but to hook. Your admiration becomes proof of their worth. Your curiosity becomes leverage. Your emotional reactions become currency. Whether you are happy, confused, anxious, or upset, it all confirms their relevance. What matters is not the quality of attention, but the consistency of it. Love requires vulnerability, and narcissism cannot tolerate vulnerability. Love asks for mutual recognition, the ability to hold another person as separate and equal. Attention control avoids that risk. It keeps the dynamic one directional, where they are the subject and you are the audience. In this structure, you are slowly trained to respond to them, to anticipate their moods, to adjust your behavior so the connection feels stable. What is actually happening is that your nervous system is being conditioned to prioritize them. This is why conflict feels endless and resolution never arrives. Real resolution would mean shared accountability, which would weaken their position. Instead, drama cycles are created because they reliably pull your attention back. You explain yourself, you defend, you hope they will finally understand. All of that energy reinforces their power even when you believe you are standing up for yourself. When attention begins to shift, when you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop seeking emotional closure, the narcissist experiences this as threat, not loss of love, but loss of control. The bond was never secured through trust, it was secured through your engagement. Once that engagement fades, the structure collapses. They may escalate, behaviors become louder, more emotional, more provocative because subtle control no longer works. This dynamic often confuses people because they equate intensity with care. The narcissist appears passionate, reactive, emotionally invested, but intensity is not intimacy. Intensity is stimulation. Intimacy is safety. Attention control thrives on intensity because it keeps you activated. Love would require steadiness, humility, and emotional responsibility. Understanding this reframes the entire relationship. You were not loved and then discarded. You were attended to and then destabilized. Your value was never the issue. Your attention was the resource. And when you begin to reclaim it, the imbalance becomes visible, the manipulation clearer, and the grip weaker. This is why indifference feels like liberation rather than emptiness, because when attention returns to you, your internal world begins to stabilize, and the illusion of their power quietly dissolves. Indifference feels more threatening to a narcissist than rejection because rejection still preserves connection, while indifference dissolves it. Rejection says you matter enough to hurt me, to anger me, to engage with you. It keeps the emotional cord intact even if it is strained. A narcissist can work with rejection. They can argue against it, punish it, rewrite it, or use it to fuel their narrative, but indifference offers no surface to grip, no emotional feedback, no confirmation of relevance. At the core of narcissism is a dependence on external validation. The narcissist regulates their self-worth through others' reactions. Without reaction, they are left alone with an unstable inner world that they do not know how to soothe. Rejection still provides stimulation. It triggers anger, defensiveness, or wounded pride, all of which keep the emotional system activated. Indifference shuts that system down. It removes the supply. When you reject a narcissist, you are still centered around them. Your words, your boundaries, your explanations are still oriented toward their behavior. Even anger keeps them psychologically present. They can tell themselves they still matter enough to evoke feeling. Indifference communicates something far more unsettling. You have emotionally reorganized your life in a way that no longer includes them. This is why narcissists often respond more intensely when they sense emotional withdrawal than when they face confrontation. Silence, lack of reaction, calm, detachment. These are interpreted not as maturity, but as annihilation. They may escalate dramatically because they are attempting to reinsert themselves into your emotional field. Any response, even negative, restores their sense of existence. Indifference also strips away the fantasy they hold about themselves. A narcissist often believes they are unforgettable, irreplaceable, central. When you stop caring, you challenge that belief without saying a word. There is no argument to win, no story to rewrite. Your neutrality becomes evidence that their impact was not permanent. This is deeply destabilizing. For many narcissists, being forgotten feels worse than being hated. Hate still implies significance. It confirms power. Indifference suggests irrelevance, and irrelevance is unbearable for a personality organized around being seen, admired, feared, or desired. This is why attempts to provoke you often increase after you disengage. Sudden kindness, cruelty, nostalgia, accusations, emergencies. None of it is about resolution, it is about reaction. They are not trying to reconnect emotionally. They are trying to restore the feedback loop. For the person disengaging, indifference can feel unnatural at first, especially if you were conditioned to over-explain and empathize. You may worry you are being cold or unkind, but indifference is not cruelty. It is emotional boundary. It is the nervous system finally standing down after prolonged activation. When you reach indifference, you are no longer negotiating your worth or defending your reality. You are simply no longer available for the dynamic, And in that absence, the narcissist is forced to confront what rejection never required them to face. Their power was never inherent, it was borrowed from your attention. When the loss of emotional supply occurs, it triggers panic, image management, and manipulation because the narcissist's inner stability depends on constant external reinforcement. Emotional supply is not simply admiration, it is the steady stream of attention, validation, reaction, and engagement that props up a fragile sense of self. When that stream slows or stops, the narcissist does not experience sadness in the way a securely attached person might. They experience disintegration. The first response is often panic, though it may be hidden behind charm, anger, or urgency. Panic arises because the narcissist feels an abrupt drop in control over how they are perceived and how they regulate themselves. Without your emotional responsiveness, their internal emptiness becomes louder. This is why their behavior may suddenly feel frantic or extreme. They are attempting to plug a psychological leak. Image management quickly follows. Narcissists are deeply invested in how they appear, not only to others, but to themselves. When emotional supply disappears, the carefully curated self-image is threatened. They may rush to portray themselves as improved, enlightened, or wronged. Stories are rewritten, timelines adjusted, apologies issued, or blame redirected. None of this is about repair. It is about restoring a version of themselves that feels powerful and intact. Manipulation becomes the tool of choice because it is familiar and effective. They may evoke guilt, reminding you of shared history, sacrifices, or vulnerabilities. They may manufacture crises to demand your attention, or they may adopt sudden humility, presenting as broken or misunderstood. This can look like growth, but it is strategic vulnerability, offered without accountability. The goal is not mutual understanding, but emotional reentry. What makes this phase confusing is that some of the behaviors appear caring, attentive, or self-aware. The difference lies in consistency and follow through. True change is slow, uncomfortable, and requires tolerating shame. Manipulative change is immediate, dramatic, and collapses the moment attention is restored. Once the emotional supply resumes, the urgency to transform disappears. If manipulation fails, some narcissists escalate to control through intimidation, devaluation, or withdrawal. They may attempt to punish you for disengaging by withholding affection, spreading narratives, or flaunting replacements. This too is image management. It allows them to reassert superiority and avoid confronting loss. Throughout this process, the narcissist remains focused outward on managing perception rather than inward on reflection. Emotional supply loss does not produce insight, it produces survival behavior. They are not asking what went wrong, but how do I regain equilibrium? For the person stepping away, this phase can be destabilizing because it often triggers empathy, hope, or self-doubt. You may wonder if you misjudged them, if they are finally changing, if you are being unfair. Understanding the function of emotional supply clarifies the pattern. This is not healing in motion, it is control scrambling. The most revealing aspect is that once emotional supply is fully removed, the panic subsides not into growth, but into replacement or detachment. The system resets elsewhere. This confirms the truth that the bond was never about connection, it was about regulation, and when that regulation ends, the performance ends with it. Their reactions are about restoring control, not restoring connection, because connection requires mutuality, accountability, and emotional risk, while control preserves hierarchy and safety for the narcissist. When a narcissist senses that you are pulling away, their primary concern is not the loss of intimacy, but the loss of influence. Intimacy would ask them to tolerate discomfort, admit harm, and recognize your separateness. Control allows them to avoid all of that. In a healthy relationship, disconnection prompts curiosity and repair. There is an effort to understand what changed and why. With a narcissist, disconnection activates strategy rather than reflection. They scan for what lever still works, what emotion still pulls you back, what version of themselves still holds power. Their focus remains on outcome, not understanding. This is why their responses often feel calculated, even when they appear emotional. Tears, anger, declarations of love, or sudden insight are not expressions of shared reality. They are interventions designed to shift your behavior. If connection were the goal, there would be listening consistency and respect for boundaries. Instead, you often see pressure, urgency, and disregard for your pace. Control-based reactions also explain the lack of lasting change. A narcissist may temporarily adapt behaviors to regain access, but once control is reestablished, the effort fades. Connection requires ongoing self-regulation and empathy. Control only requires performance until compliance returns. Another marker is how they respond to your boundaries. Boundaries are invitations to relate differently when connection is the goal. They are obstacles to be overcome when control is the goal. A narcissist may argue against your boundary, reinterpret it, minimize it, or punish you for setting it. None of these responses seek closeness, they seek dominance. The emotional tone is also revealing. There is often intensity without warmth. Words may sound loving, but feel empty because they are not accompanied by presence or responsibility. Connection feels steady and grounded. Control feels urgent and pressurized. The body often recognizes this before the mind does. When control cannot be restored through charm, it often shifts to fear, obligation, or guilt. These are not relational tools, they are coercive ones. The narcissist may imply you owe them, threaten withdrawal, or suggest dire consequences. This reinforces the power imbalance and recenters them as the authority in the dynamic. What makes this painful is that many people mistake control attempts for passion or investment, especially if they have been conditioned to equate drama with care. The attention feels familiar, even validating, but it is not attunement, it is capture. Recognizing that their behavior is about control rather than connection can be sobering because it dismantles the hope that if you just explain yourself better or stay calmer, they will finally meet you emotionally. That meeting was never the aim. When you stop participating in the struggle for control, the dynamic loses its charge. You are no longer a variable to be managed. And in that stillness, the truth becomes clear. They were not fighting for the relationship. They were fighting for the position they held within it. Your detachment creates clarity and exposes the imbalance because distance interrupts the emotional fog that kept the dynamic confusing and self-doubting. When you are deeply involved with a narcissist, your nervous system is constantly activated. You are reacting, explaining, anticipating, adjusting. This state of emotional closeness makes it difficult to see patterns clearly because everything feels urgent, personal, and unresolved. Detachment slows the system down and allows perception to return. As you step back, you begin to notice how one-sided the relationship truly was. Conversations were centered around their needs, their moods, their crises. Your emotions were managed, minimized, or postponed. Your detachment reveals how much emotional labor you were carrying and how little was reciprocated. What once felt like complexity begins to look like imbalance. Clarity also comes from the absence of distortion. Narcissistic dynamics often involve gaslighting, subtle or overt, which erodes trust in your own perception. When you disengage, you are no longer constantly being corrected, interrupted, or reframed by someone invested in maintaining power. Without that influence, your thoughts begin to organize themselves. You remember things accurately. You trust your reactions again. Detachment exposes how conditional their engagement was. When you stop providing validation, problem solving, or emotional regulation, their interest shifts or intensifies strategically. This contrast makes the transactional nature of the bond visible. You see that closeness was often contingent on your compliance, and distance was used as punishment. The relationship functioned less as a partnership and more as a system of control. You may also notice how your detachment unsettles them more than your pain ever did. This realization can be sobering because it highlights that your suffering was not the breaking point. Their discomfort at losing access was. This awareness helps dissolve self-blame. You were not too sensitive, demanding, or difficult. You were responding to a structure that required self-erasure. As clarity grows, so does grief. Detachment does not eliminate feeling, it refines it. You begin to mourn, not only what happened, but what never truly existed. The mutuality, the safety, the emotional presence you hoped for. This grief is clean compared to the chronic confusion you lived with. It is painful, but it is honest. Exposing the imbalance also restores proportion. You stop centering their reactions and start noticing your own needs, limits, and desires. The relationship is no longer the reference point for your worth. You see that your energy, attention, and care were resources that deserved reciprocity. Detachment allows you to observe rather than absorb. Instead of being pulled into cycles of explanation and repair, you can watch patterns repeat without your participation. This observation confirms what intuition long suspected. The dynamic did not improve because it could not while the imbalance remained. Clarity is not coldness. It is the mind and body finally aligned. You are no longer negotiating reality or minimizing harm. You are simply seeing what is. And in that seeing, the imbalance loses its power because it can no longer hide behind confusion or hope. Healing begins when you stop performing for their approval because performance keeps you externally oriented and disconnected from your own internal truth. In narcissistic dynamics, love is often conditional and unpredictable, which trains you to become hyper-aware of their reactions. You learn to adjust your tone, your needs, your boundaries, and even your values to maintain stability. Over time, this adaptation becomes automatic, and you may not realize how much of yourself is being edited out. Performance is not authenticity, it is survival. When approval is scarce or inconsistent, the nervous system learns that being acceptable is safer than being real. You become skilled at reading cues, anticipating moods, and presenting the version of yourself most likely to be rewarded. This constant self-monitoring fractures your sense of identity because your worth becomes dependent on how well you are received. Healing requires turning that attention inward for the first time. It begins when you ask not how do I appear, but how do I feel? This shift can be deeply uncomfortable because performance once protected you from conflict, abandonment, or emotional withdrawal. Letting go of it may initially feel like risk or loss, but it is also relief. When you stop performing, you may notice guilt, anxiety, or fear. These emotions are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They are withdrawal symptoms from a system that required self-suppression to function. Your body is recalibrating to a new orientation where safety comes from self-trust rather than external validation. Without performance, the narcissist may escalate because the dynamic no longer works. Your calm authenticity offers no leverage. This can confirm the truth that approval was never freely given. It was exchanged for compliance. Recognizing this can be painful, but it is also liberating. You no longer have to earn basic respect. Healing deepens as you reclaim spontaneity and emotional honesty. You begin to express needs without rehearsing them. You set boundaries without over-explaining. You allow yourself to be disappointed without self-blame. This is not selfishness, it is integration. As performance falls away, your nervous system settles. You are no